They hear voices through the chapel walls. German voices. Sergeant Daniel Reeves freezes mid-step, his hand rising to halt the 5 men behind him. The intelligence report said this convent was abandoned 3 months ago, windows boarded, nuns relocated to Richmond. But someone is inside, speaking in hushed, urgent German. Reeves meets the eyes of Corporal Hayes, and both men know what happens next could end their careers or save their lives. The decision comes fast. Kick in the door, weapons raised, and face whatever's hiding in a place that's supposed to be empty. What they find inside won't be enemy soldiers preparing an attack. It'll be worse. It'll be a choice. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. February 1944. Virginia cold isn't the bitter, bone-cracking freeze of northern winters, but it's the kind that seeps through wool and settles into joints. The kind that makes a man's fingers stiff on a rifle, makes breath hang visible in the air long enough to give away a position. Sergeant Daniel Reeves had been walking point for 2 hours, leading his squad through farmland gone quiet under snow, past fields stubbled with dead corn and fences sagging under ice. The patrol was routine. Check the perimeter of Camp Ashford. Make sure no one had wandered off. No civilians gotten too curious about the prisoner of war facility that squatted 5 miles west. The brass didn't like surprises. Neither did Reeves. Behind him, his men moved in a loose line, boots crunching through frozen crust. Corporal Leonard Hayes, lean and watchful, scanned the tree line with the habit of someone who'd learned not to trust silence. Private First Class Eugene Morris carried the squad's radio, the weight of it pulling at his shoulders. The antenna a thin finger pointing skyward. Private Vincent Shaw brought up the rear, his Thompson submachine gun cradled easy, his eyes always checking their 6. They were good men, steady. They'd trained together at Camp Ashford for 8 months now, drilling in tactics they'd use when they finally shipped overseas, if they ever shipped overseas. The rumor mill said colored troops were being held stateside longer than anyone wanted to admit. Reeves didn't let himself think about that. He focused on the mission. Check the patrol route, mark anything unusual, return by 1500 hours. Simple. The convent appeared through the trees like a memory half forgotten. Stone walls dark with moisture and age. A peaked roof, missing shingles. A cross at the apex, tilted slightly to the left, as though even God had lost interest in the place. The windows were boarded with fresh lumber, the kind that still showed pale where nails bit through. The main door stood at the top of a short staircase, heavy oak reinforced with iron bands. The whole structure looked like it had been built to last centuries, not to be abandoned after barely 1. Reeves raised a fist. The squad stopped. No one spoke. They'd done this enough times that words were unnecessary. Hayes moved left, Shaw moved right. Morris stayed center with the radio. Reeves approached the steps slowly, his M1 Garand held at the ready, safety off, finger resting outside the trigger guard. Discipline. Always discipline. He paused at the base of the stairs, listened. Wind through bare branches, the distant call of a crow. Nothing else. He glanced back at Hayes, who shook his head. Clear. Reeves climbed the steps, each one groaning under his boots despite the cold. Old wood. He reached the door and pressed his gloved hand against it. Solid. Locked, probably. He leaned close, listening. That's when he heard it. A voice. Low, male, speaking quickly in a language that wasn't English. German. Unmistakably German. Reeves went still. His pulse kicked up, but his breathing stayed even. Training took over. He stepped back, turned, signaled Hayes forward. The corporal moved up the steps fast and silent, pressing his ear to the door. His eyes widened. He nodded once, confirmed. Morris and Shaw converged without needing orders. The 4 men stacked up on either side of the door, weapons ready. Reeves tried the handle, locked. He looked at Hayes, who pulled a pry bar from his pack. No time for subtlety. Reeves counted down with his fingers. 3, 2, 1. Hayes jammed the bar into the doorframe and wrenched. The lock splintered with a crack that echoed through the stillness. Reeves kicked the door open and went in fast, rifle up, sweeping left. Hayes followed, sweeping right. Morris and Shaw poured in behind them, covering angles, voices sharp and overlapping. "Clear left! Movement right, right!" Hands! Hands where we can see them! The interior of the convent was dim, lit only by gaps in the boarded windows and the grey light filtering through the open door. The air smelled of candle wax, damp stone, and something else. Sickness, unwashed bodies, fear. Reeves' eyes adjusted fast. The main chapel opened before them, rows of wooden pews still in place, an altar at the far end beneath a faded painting of the Virgin Mary. And standing near the altar, hands raised in surrender, were two women in black habits, nuns, old, thin, their faces pale and lined with exhaustion. But that wasn't what made Reeves's stomach drop. Behind the nuns, emerging slowly from the shadows near the side aisles and vestry door, were men. 12 of them, gaunt, bearded, wearing tattered grey uniforms with faded insignia, prisoners of war, German POWs. Their hands rose slowly, palms open, eyes fixed on the rifles aimed at their chests. No one moved. No one spoke. The silence stretched taut as wire. Reeves kept his rifle steady, his mind racing. Intelligence said this place was empty. The last report was November, 3 months ago. These men weren't supposed to be here. Escaped prisoners were supposed to be reported immediately, hunted down, returned to custody. The nuns were aiding the enemy. That was treason. Federal offense. He should call it in right now, have MPs here within the hour, get these prisoners back to Camp Ashford in chains. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the way the nuns stood between his squad and the prisoners, their bodies frail but their stances protective. Maybe it was the way the Germans didn't look like soldiers anymore. They looked like men on the edge of collapse. Hollow cheeks, sunken eyes, shoulders hunched against cold and hunger. One of them was shaking, fever or fear. Reeves couldn't tell. Another had a bandage wrapped around his hand, the cloth stained dark. One of the nuns stepped forward. She was the older of the two, her face carved with deep lines, her eyes sharp despite her age. She lowered her hands slowly, deliberately, and spoke in accented but clear English. "Please," she said, "do not shoot." Reeves didn't lower his rifle. "Ma'am, you need to step aside." "They are not armed," the nun said. Her voice was steady, calm, as though she'd been expecting this. "They have no weapons. They are sick, starving. If you take them now, they will die." "They're prisoners of war," Reeves said flatly. "They're supposed to be in custody." "They escaped because they were afraid," the nun said. "Not of you, of what waits for them after the war. They are not Nazis. They were conscripted, forced to fight. Some of them are barely older than boys." Reeves glanced at Hayes. The corporal's jaw was tight, his rifle still aimed, but his eyes flickered with something Reeves recognized. Doubt. Hayes had a younger brother, 17, about to be drafted. Maybe that's what he was thinking. "Ma'am, I don't make the rules," Reeves said. "You're harboring escaped POWs. That's a federal crime." "I am harboring human beings," the nun said. "There is no crime in that." "The law says different." "The law," the nun said quietly, "is not always just." Reeves felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. His orders were clear. Report anything unusual, secure the area, return to base. This was more than unusual. This was a court-martial waiting to happen. But the nun's words hung in the air and he couldn't shake them. The law is not always just. He'd heard those words before, in a different context, a different life. He'd grown up hearing them. One of the Germans coughed, a wet, rattling sound that echoed through the chapel. The man doubled over, clutching his chest, and the nun moved to him without hesitation. She placed a hand on his back, steadying him, murmuring something in German. The man nodded weakly, sinking onto a pew. The other nun brought him water in a tin cup. He drank like a man dying of thirst. Reeves watched. His men watched. No one lowered their weapons, but no one fired either. The silence stretched again, heavier now, full of questions no one wanted to ask aloud. Finally Morris spoke, his voice low. "Sarge, what do we do?" That was the question. What did they do? Follow orders and drag 12 starving men back to a camp where God knew what waited for them? Arrest 2 old women who'd chosen mercy over law? Or walk away, pretend they never saw this, and let whatever happened here stay buried in the walls of an abandoned convent? Reeves looked at the nuns, at the prisoners, at his men. He thought about duty, about honor, about the oaths he'd sworn and the reasons he'd sworn them. He thought about the world he wanted to return to when this war was over, and whether that world was built on following orders without question, or on choosing what was right even when it cost you everything. He lowered his rifle. Not much, just enough. Hayes noticed. So did Shaw. They didn't lower theirs, but they shifted, stance easing slightly, fingers moving away from triggers. It wasn't surrender. It was hesitation. And in that moment, hesitation was enough. "Ma'am," Reeves said quietly, "you've got about 5 minutes to explain why I shouldn't call this in right now." The nun nodded once. "Then listen," she said, "and I will tell you the truth." The older nun's name was Sister Margaret. She spoke with the careful precision of someone who had rehearsed this moment in her mind 100 times, knowing it would eventually come. The younger nun, Sister Anne, stood silent beside her, hands folded, eyes downcast. The 12 German prisoners remained where they were, scattered among the pews like ghosts haunting their own refuge. Reeves kept his rifle lowered but ready. Hayes and Shaw held their positions. Morris stayed near the door, one hand on his radio, waiting for the word that would change everything. Sister Margaret began simply. "They came here 6 weeks ago. It was December, the coldest night we'd had all winter. Sister Anne and I heard knocking at the door very late, past midnight. We almost didn't answer, but the knocking was desperate, frantic. When I opened the door, 3 men collapsed at my feet. They were hypothermic, frostbitten. One of them was unconscious." She paused, glancing at the prisoners. One of them, a thin man with grey streaks in his beard, nodded slightly, confirming her story. "They spoke no English," Sister Margaret continued, "only German. But suffering needs no translation. We brought them inside, warmed them by the stove, gave them water, broth, what little we had. By morning, 9 more arrived. They had escaped from Camp Ashford 3 days earlier. They'd been hiding in the woods, moving only at night, trying to reach the coast. Foolish, of course, they would never have made it, but they were terrified. "Terrified of what?" Reeves asked. His voice was harder than he intended. Sister Margaret met his eyes. Of being sent back to Germany after the war, of what would happen to them there. Reeves frowned. "They're prisoners. They go home when it's over. That's how it works." "Not for all of them," Sister Margaret said quietly. "Some of these men were forced into service, conscripted at gunpoint. Others deserted from the Wehrmacht and were recaptured by the SS, sent to penal units. If they return to Germany, they will be tried as traitors, executed. Their families will suffer the same fate." One of the prisoners spoke then, his English broken but understandable. "My brother, he refused to fight. They shoot him, in front of my mother. I have no choice. I fight or I die with him." His voice cracked. "But I do not believe. I never believe." Reeves looked at the man. He was young, maybe 25, with hollow cheeks and eyes that had seen too much. His hands trembled as he spoke. Reeves had seen that look before, in mirrors, in the faces of men who'd done things they couldn't undo and carried the weight of it every day. "That doesn't change the law," Reeves said, but his voice had lost some of its edge. "The law," Sister Margaret said, "does not account for conscience." Hayes shifted his weight, glancing at Reeves. "Sarge, we need to make a call. We're burning daylight." Reeves nodded slowly. He knew Hayes was right. Every minute they stayed here was another minute closer to someone noticing they hadn't reported in, another minute closer to questions they couldn't answer. But he didn't reach for the radio, not yet. "Why didn't you report them?" Reeves asked the nun. "You could have called the MPs, handed them over, stayed out of it." Sister Margaret smiled faintly, a sad, knowing expression. "Because I am a servant of God, Sergeant. And God does not ask us to turn away the suffering, no matter who they are. These men came to us seeking sanctuary. We gave it. That is our duty, our calling." "Your calling could get you arrested," Reeves said. "Yes," Sister Margaret said simply. "It could." The honesty of it hit Reeves harder than he expected. This woman knew exactly what she was risking. She'd made her choice with full awareness of the cost. That took a kind of courage he wasn't sure he had. Shaw spoke up from his position near the altar. What about food, water, medical supplies? How have you been keeping them alive? Sister Anne answered this time, her voice soft and hesitant. We have a root cellar. Vegetables we stored from the garden last fall. Potatoes, carrots, onions, not much but enough. We ration carefully. And there's a well in the back courtyard. The water is clean. Medical supplies? Shaw pressed. Sister Anne hesitated, then said, We have bandages, herbs. I studied nursing before I took my vows. I do what I can. Shaw glanced at one of the prisoners, the one with the bandaged hand. That hand infected. The man looked down at the bandage, then nodded slowly. Ja? Yes. Is bad. Shaw moved toward him without lowering his Thompson. Let me see. The prisoner hesitated, looking to Sister Margaret. She nodded. The man unwrapped the bandage slowly. The smell hit them immediately. Rot. Infection. The wound was deep, a gash across the palm that had gone septic, the edges black and swollen. Shaw grimaced. That needs a medic. Real medicine. He could lose the hand if it spreads. Sister Anne's face tightened with guilt. I've done everything I know. But I don't have antibiotics. I don't have proper tools. Reeves watched Shaw rewrap the hand carefully, his movements efficient, clinical. Shaw had worked as an orderly before the army. He knew wounds. He knew what happened when infection set in. The prisoner murmured something in German, his voice thick with pain. Shaw nodded once, then stepped back. Morris spoke quietly from the doorway. Sarge, we've been here 15 minutes. If we don't check in soon, they'll send someone looking. Reeves knew that. He felt the clock ticking in his chest like a second heartbeat. He looked around the chapel again, taking it all in. The prisoners, thin and worn, watching him with a mixture of hope and resignation. The nuns, calm and resolute, ready to face whatever came. His men, waiting for orders, trusting him to make the right call. But what was the right call? He thought about duty, about the oath he'd taken to follow orders, to serve his country, to uphold the law. He thought about the manual they'd drilled into him at basic training, the regulations that covered every situation, every decision. This situation wasn't in the manual. Or maybe it was, and he just didn't like what it said. He thought about the world he'd grown up in, where laws were written by people who didn't live under them, enforced by people who didn't question them. He thought about men who followed orders without asking why and what that led to. He'd seen it. Hell, he was looking at it right now, in the faces of 12 men who'd done exactly that, and ended up here, hiding in a convent, waiting to die. Sarge. Hayes's voice was quiet, but it carried weight. The question was clear. What do we do? Reeves looked at Sister Margaret. If I walk out of here and don't report this, I'm risking my career, my men's careers. We could face charges, dishonorable discharge, prison time. I know, Sister Margaret said, and if I do report it, you'll be arrested. These men will be sent back to Camp Ashford. The one with the infected hand might die before he gets proper treatment. The rest will be put in isolation, maybe solitary, as punishment for escaping, and when the war ends, they'll be shipped back to Germany to face whatever's waiting for them there. Sister Margaret nodded. That is also true. Reeves let out a slow breath. You're asking me to choose between my duty and my conscience. No, Sergeant, Sister Margaret said gently. I'm asking you to recognize that sometimes they are the same thing. The words settled into the cold air of the chapel like stones dropped into still water. Reeves felt them ripple through him, touching something he'd tried to keep buried. He looked at his men. Hayes, steady and loyal, waiting. Shaw, practical and sharp, already thinking 3 steps ahead. Morris, young and uncertain, his hand still on the radio. They would follow whatever order he gave. They trusted him. That trust was a weight heavier than any rifle. One of the prisoners coughed again, that same wet, rattling sound. He doubled over and Sister Anne moved to him quickly, supporting his shoulders. The man's face was flushed with fever, his breathing labored. Pneumonia, probably. Without proper medicine, he wouldn't last another week, maybe less. Reeves made his decision. He didn't announce it. He simply turned to Morris and said, "Put the radio down." Morris blinked. "Sarge?" "Put it down," Reeves repeated. "We're not calling this in." "Not yet." Hayes' eyebrows rose, but he didn't question it. Shaw nodded slowly, as if he'd been expecting it. Morris hesitated, then lowered the radio to the floor, relief and worry crossing his face in equal measure. Sister Margaret exhaled, a sound like a prayer answered. "But," Reeves said, his voice firm, "we're not walking away either. That man needs antibiotics, real medical care. We're going to get it for him. And we're going to figure out what the hell we're going to do about all of this before someone else finds this place." "How?" Hayes asked. Reeves looked at him. "I don't know yet, but we've got until tonight to come up with something." The decision was made. There was no taking it back now. Reeves had crossed a line and he'd brought his men with him. Whatever happened next, they were in it together, for better or worse. Sister Margaret stepped forward and placed a hand on Reeves's arm. Her touch was light, almost fragile, but her grip was firm. "Thank you," she said quietly. Reeves didn't answer. He wasn't sure he deserved thanks. He wasn't even sure he'd made the right choice. All he knew was that he'd made the only choice he could live with, and now he had to find a way to make it work. He turned to his men. "Shaw, inventory their medical situation. I need to know who needs what. Hayes, check the perimeter. Make sure we're not about to get surprised. Morris, you're with me. We need to talk logistics." The men moved without hesitation, falling into the rhythm of a mission, because that's what this was now. A mission, unauthorized, unsanctioned, and possibly suicidal. But a mission nonetheless. And as Reeves watched his squad work, as he saw the prisoners' faces shift from despair to fragile hope, as he met Sister Margaret's grateful eyes, he realized something that both terrified and steadied him. He'd just put everything on the line for 12 men he didn't know, in a war that wasn't even his to fight anymore. And he'd do it again, because some choices weren't about duty or orders or consequences. Some choices were about looking in the mirror and recognizing the man staring back. The question now was whether that man would survive what came next. Outside, the winter wind picked up, rattling the boarded windows and whispering through the cracks in the stone. Inside, the chapel was silent, except for the sound of men breathing, hoping and preparing for whatever dawn would bring. Shaw finished his assessment within the hour. 3 men with pneumonia, all in varying stages. The one with the infected hand, whose name was Friedrich, also had a fever climbing toward dangerous levels. 2 others showed signs of malnutrition, severe enough to cause muscle weakness and confusion. 1 had frostbite on 3 toes that needed monitoring. The rest was simply starving, worn down by weeks of inadequate food and the constant strain of hiding. Shaw's report was clinical, but his eyes told a different story. These men were dying slowly. Without intervention, at least 2 wouldn't see spring. Reeves listened, his jaw tight. He'd known it was bad. Seeing the numbers made it real. He pulled Shaw aside near one of the boarded windows where grey light leaked through the cracks. "What do we need?" Reeves asked quietly. Shaw didn't hesitate. "Penicillin, sulfur drugs if we can get them. Bandages, proper antiseptic, aspirin for the fevers, and food, real food, protein. These men are eating like sparrows and working like they're still in combat." "They're not working at all," Reeves said. "Their bodies are," Shaw replied. "Fighting infection, fighting cold, fighting starvation. That takes calories they don't have." Reeves nodded slowly. The list was manageable, but getting it without raising flags would be the trick. Medical supplies were tracked, logged, accounted for. You couldn't just walk into the infirmary and load up a bag without someone asking questions. And food was rationed, even on base. Taking enough to feed 12 extra mouths would get noticed fast. Hayes returned from his perimeter check, brushing snow from his shoulders. "We're clear for now. No tracks except ours. No signs anyone's been out here recently. But there's a road about half a mile east. Civilian traffic. If someone hears something or sees smoke from the chimney, we'll have company." "Then we keep the fire low," Reeves said, "and we don't stay longer than we have to." Morris was sitting on a pew near the door, the radio at his feet, looking like a man who'd just bet his life savings on a bad hand of cards. Reeves understood the feeling. He walked over and sat beside him. "You good?" Reeves asked. Morris took a moment to answer. "Sarge, I joined up to fight. To do my part. Not to... this." He gestured vaguely at the chapel, the prisoners, the whole impossible situation. "I know," Reeves said. If we get caught. We won't, Reeves said, though he wasn't sure he believed it. Morris looked at him, searching his face. You really think we can pull this off? Reeves didn't answer right away. He looked around the chapel, at the prisoners watching them with desperate hope, at the nuns moving quietly among them, offering water and comfort. He thought about the choice he'd made, the line he'd crossed, and whether there was any going back from it. I think we don't have a choice, Reeves finally said. Those men are dying. We can help them, or we can walk away and let it happen. I can't do the second thing. Can you? Morris stared at his boots for a long moment, then shook his head. No, Sarge, I can't. Then we figure it out, Reeves said, together. The plan came together in pieces, stitched from necessity and risk. Shaw would return to base with Morris, file the patrol report as routine, nothing unusual. While there, Shaw would visit the infirmary on the pretense of restocking his field kit. He'd lift what he could without drawing attention. Penicillin would be the hardest. It was strictly controlled, every dose logged. But Shaw knew the orderly on duty, a man who owed him a favor from a poker game gone wrong. It was a thin thread to hang their hopes on, but it was all they had. Food was trickier. Hayes suggested the mess hall, claiming extra rations for an extended patrol. But that required paperwork, signatures, explanations, too many questions. Sister Margaret offered a simpler solution. There was a farmer 2 miles south, a man named Holland who'd sold produce to the convent before the nuns were supposed to have left. He was old, kept to himself, and didn't ask questions. If they had money, he'd sell them what they needed and forget the transaction by morning. How much do you need? Reeves asked. Sister Margaret considered. $20 would buy enough to last a week, maybe more if we're careful. Reeves pulled out his wallet. He had 15. Hayes added 3. Shaw dug out a crumpled 5 from his jacket pocket. Morris contributed $2 in coins, $25 total. It felt like a fortune and a pittance at the same time. I'll go, Hayes volunteered. Less suspicious if it's just one man. I'll say I'm buying for a church social or something. Reeves nodded. Take the money, be back before dark. And Hayes, I know, Sarge, don't get caught. Hayes left through the back door, disappearing into the grey afternoon. Shaw and Morris prepared to head back to base, synchronizing their story one last time. Reeves stayed behind with the nuns and prisoners, alone now in a way that made the weight of his decision feel heavier. He was the one who'd chosen this path. If it went wrong, it would be his name on the court-martial papers. While the others were gone, Reeves found himself talking to the prisoners, not interrogating, just talking. His German was limited to a few phrases from training, but several of the men spoke broken English. The one with the grey beard, who'd confirmed Sister Margaret's story earlier, introduced himself as Otto. He'd been a school teacher in Bavaria before the war. Conscripted in 1942, sent to the Russian front, then transferred west when his unit was decimated. He had a wife and 2 daughters. He hadn't heard from them in a year. You fear what happens if you go back, Reeves said. It wasn't a question. Otto nodded. I deserted once, 1943, in Russia. I could not do what they asked. I was found, brought back. They did not shoot me. They sent me to punishment battalion instead. Worse than shooting. If I return to Germany now, they will remember. My family will pay. Maybe the war will be over before that matters, Reeves said. Otto smiled sadly. You believe that? Reeves didn't answer. He wasn't sure what he believed anymore. The lines that had seemed so clear when he enlisted, the simple divide between us and them, right and wrong, had blurred into something he couldn't navigate with a compass and a manual. These men were the enemy. That was a fact. But they were also just men, scared and broken and trying to survive. That was a fact too. Both things could be true at once, and that truth was harder to carry than any rifle. Friedrich, the man with the infected hand, approached slowly. He moved like every step hurt, his face pale and slick with sweat. He held up his bandaged hand and said in halting English, Thank you. You help. Why? Reeves looked at him, at the fever in his eyes, the tremor in his hand. Because it's the right thing to do. Friedrich frowned, struggling with the words. But we are enemy. Yeah, Reeves said quietly. You are. Then why? Reeves thought about that. He thought about all the reasons he could give, all the justifications and philosophies and moral arguments. But in the end, it came down to something simpler, something he wasn't sure he could explain even to himself. Because somebody has to draw the line, Reeves said. Somewhere, even in a war, maybe especially in a war. Friedrich studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. He simply gripped Reeves's shoulder briefly with his good hand, a gesture that crossed language and uniform and history, and walked back to the pew where he'd been resting. Shaw and Morris returned first, just after 1600 hours. Shaw had a canvas bag slung over his shoulder, heavy with supplies. He set it down carefully and unpacked it like a man defusing a bomb. 6 vials of penicillin, a bottle of sulfur tablets, bandages, antiseptic, aspirin, gauze. Not everything they needed, but enough. More than enough to make a difference. "How'd you get it?" Reeves asked. Shaw's expression was carefully neutral. "Don't ask questions you don't want answered, Sarge." Reeves let it drop. Shaw had taken a risk, probably a big one. That was enough. He watched as Shaw moved to Friedrich first, cleaning the infected wound with antiseptic that made the man hiss through his teeth. Shaw worked with steady hands, his face a mask of concentration. He injected the first dose of penicillin, then bandaged the hand properly with clean gauze. Friedrich watched him with something like reverence. "You are doctor?" Friedrich asked. "Medic," Shaw said. "Close enough." Shaw moved to the pneumonia cases next, distributing sulfur tablets and aspirin, instructing Sister Anne on dosages and timing. The nun watched carefully, memorizing every detail. She had the focused attention of someone who knew this knowledge might mean the difference between life and death. Haze returned as the sun was setting, the sky beyond the boarded windows turning deep blue. He carried 2 burlap sacks, both heavy with food, potatoes, carrots, turnips, a slab of salted pork wrapped in cloth, a dozen eggs carefully packed in straw. He set them down on a pew and grinned. Holland didn't even blink. "Took the money, loaded the sacks, told me to say hello to Pastor Williams. I didn't correct him." Sister Margaret inspected the food with the careful eye of someone who'd learned to make miracles from scraps. "This will last 10 days if we're wise. Longer, if we stretch it." "Stretch it," Reeves said. "We don't know how long this has to hold." The squad prepared to leave. They'd been here for hours, longer than any routine patrol should take. They'd need an explanation if anyone asked. Reeves decided on the simplest lie. They'd investigated the convent, found it empty as reported, and spent extra time securing the perimeter because of tracks they'd thought might be civilian hunters. Thin, but plausible. It would have to be enough. Before they left, Sister Margaret pulled Reeves aside. "You've given us time," she said. "A chance. But you can't keep coming back. Eventually, someone will notice." "I know," Reeves said. "So what happens next?" Reeves looked at the prisoners, at the supplies Shaw had brought, at the food stacked on the pews. "I don't know yet, but I'll figure something out." Sister Margaret touched his arm again, that same light, firm grip. "You're a good man, Sergeant." Reeves shook his head. "I'm just a man trying to do the right thing. I'm not sure that makes me good." "It's a start," she said. The squad left through the front door, stepping back into the cold and the fading light. They moved in silence, each man alone with his thoughts. Reeves led them back toward base, his mind already working through the problems ahead. How long could they keep this secret? What happened if someone else stumbled onto the convent? What happened when the war ended and decisions had to be made about prisoners, about nuns, about soldiers who'd crossed lines they weren't supposed to cross? He didn't have answers. All he had was the memory of Friedrich's grateful grip on his shoulder, Otto's sad smile, Sister Margaret's steady faith. He had the knowledge that 12 men would live another day because he'd chosen mercy over duty. Whether that choice would save him or destroy him, he didn't know, but he'd made it, and he'd stand by it. They reached the edge of Camp Ashford just after 1700 hours, slipping back through the gates with the easy confidence of men who'd done nothing wrong. They filed their report, stowed their gear, and went to the mess hall for chow. Everything was routine. Everything was normal. No one suspected a thing. But as Reeves lay in his bunk that night, staring at the dark ceiling, listening to the sounds of men sleeping around him, He felt the weight of what he'd done settle into his bones. He'd committed himself to something bigger than orders, bigger than regulations. He'd committed himself to keeping 12 men alive in a world that wanted them dead or captured. And he'd dragged his squad into it with him. The question now was whether they could see it through, or whether the secret would crack open and swallow them all. Outside, the Virginia night was cold and still. Inside the convent, miles away, 12 German prisoners slept with full stomachs and fading fevers, dreaming of home. And in the space between those two truths, Sergeant Daniel Reeves lay awake and wondered what tomorrow would bring. 3 weeks passed. Reeves and his squad made 2 more trips to the convent, bringing medicine and food. Friedrich's hand healed. The pneumonia cases improved. By late February, the prisoners looked less like ghosts and more like men who might see another spring. But Reeves felt the clock ticking louder every day. Each patrol filed. Each lie told added weight to the secret they carried. The breaking point came in early March. Captain Richard Brennan called Reeves into his office. The door clicked shut with finality. "Sergeant Reeves," Brennan said, "received a report from Farmer Holland. Says he's been selling food to a soldier for a church social we don't have scheduled. Tall, lean, colored soldier. Corporal stripes." He leaned forward. "I also pulled the supply logs. Medical supplies missing. Penicillin, sulfur tablets. Small amounts but a pattern." He fixed Reeves with a hard stare. "I'm looking for a pattern, Sergeant." "Sir," Reeves said carefully, "I need your word. This stays between us long enough for me to explain." Brennan sat back. After 10 seconds, he nodded. "You've got 5 minutes." Reeves told him everything. The convent, the prisoners, the nuns, the choice he'd made. No embellishment, no excuses, just facts. "Jesus Christ, Reeves," Brennan said finally. "You've harbored escaped POWs, stolen military property, lied in official reports. That's 3 court-martials." "Yes, sir." "Why risk everything for 12 Germans?" "Because they're men, sir. Starving, sick, terrified. And no one else was going to help them." Brennan walked to the window. "That's not your job." "Maybe not, sir, but it's the right thing to do." Brennan turned back to face him. "The right thing? You sound like a preacher, Sergeant." "I'm not a preacher, sir. So I'm just a soldier trying to live with himself when this war's over." Brennan studied him for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression. Not approval, exactly, but something close to understanding. He walked back to his desk and sat down heavily. "I served in the First War," Brennan said quietly. "France, 1918. Saw things I'll never forget. Men dying in mud, screaming for their mothers. Didn't matter which side they were on when they were bleeding out. They all sounded the same." He looked at Reeves. "I swore after that war I'd never forget that. The enemy's a man too, just wearing a different uniform." Reeves waited, hardly breathing. "What you've done is illegal," Brennan said. "By every regulation, I should have you and your squad in the stockade by tonight." He paused. "But what you've done is also the most decent thing I've heard of in this whole damned war. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to take me to that convent. I'm going to see these prisoners with my own eyes. And then I'm going to decide what happens next. Understood?" "Yes, sir." They drove out in a jeep, just the 2 of them. Brennan didn't speak during the ride, and Reeves didn't try to fill the silence. When they pulled up to the convent, Reeves knocked on the door 3 times, a pattern he'd established with Sister Margaret. The door opened slowly, and the nun's face went pale when she saw the captain's insignia on Brennan's uniform. "It's all right," Reeves said quickly. "He knows he's here to help." Sister Margaret stepped aside, letting them enter. Inside, the prisoners were gathered in the main chapel, alerted by the sound of the jeep. They stood as Brennan entered, their faces tense with fear. Brennan walked slowly through the space, looking at each man, taking in the makeshift sleeping areas, the careful rationing of supplies, the quiet dignity these men had tried to maintain despite everything. He stopped in front of Otto, the schoolteacher. "You speak English?" "Yes, sir," Otto said carefully. "Why did you run?" Otto hesitated, glancing at Reeves. Reeves nodded. "Tell him." "I deserted in Russia," Otto said. "I refused an order to shoot civilians. Women and children. I could not do it. I was caught, sent to punishment battalion. If I return to Germany after the war, I will be executed as a traitor. My family will suffer. So I ran." He met Brennan's eyes. "I'm not brave, sir. I am a coward who wants to live. Refusing to shoot women and children doesn't make you a coward, Brennan said quietly. It makes you human. He turned to Sister Margaret. And you knew the risk of harboring them. I did, she said simply. Why do it? Because I am called to serve God, Captain, and God does not ask me to turn away suffering, no matter whose suffering it is. Outside, Brennan lit a cigarette. I can't ignore this. But I'm not hanging you for it either. These prisoners go back to Camp Ashford, not as escapees, as surrendering POWs. They'll get proper treatment. When the war ends, their records will reflect cooperation. Might not save them all, but it gives them a chance. Reeves nodded. As for you and your squad, Brennan continued, officially you discovered these prisoners during reconnaissance and reported immediately. That's the record. The stolen supplies were administrative error. No one digs if I sign off. He dropped his cigarette. What you did was reckless, but it was good. That matters. The prisoners returned to Camp Ashford that afternoon. Friedrich shook Reeves's hand with his healed palm, tears in his eyes. Otto nodded, a gesture of respect needing no words. Sister Margaret and Sister Anne were questioned briefly, then relocated to Richmond. Before leaving, Sister Margaret found Reeves. You saved them. I just bought them time. Time is all any of us have. How we use it defines us. She squeezed his hand. You used it well, Sergeant. The squad returned to normal duties. On the surface, nothing changed, but they'd crossed a line together, made a choice that defied orders. They'd carry it for the rest of their lives. 3 months later, Germany surrendered. Reeves never learned what happened to Otto, Friedrich, or the others. He'd done what he could. The rest was beyond him. Years after the war, a letter found him. Forwarded through multiple addresses, the handwriting careful, the English imperfect but clear. Dear Sergeant Reeves, you will not remember me. My name is Otto Schneider. We met in winter 1945 in a convent in Virginia. You helped me when I had no hope. I was not executed when I returned to Germany. The war ended before they could find me. I returned to my family. My daughters are grown now. I am a teacher again. I think of you often. Your kindness did not disappear into history. It lives here in my children, in my students, in every day I am grateful to see. Thank you for choosing mercy when the world chose war. With respect and gratitude, Otto Schneider. Reeves read the letter 3 times, coffee growing cold beside him. He thought about that grey winter, the convent, the choice that had terrified and defined him. He folded it carefully and put it with the things that mattered most. His discharge papers, his wife's first letter, a photograph of his squad. Sometimes he'd take it out and read it again, reminding himself that the hardest choices are often the ones worth making. That mercy isn't weakness, that even in war humanity can survive if people choose to carry it. The convent still stands in rural Virginia, empty, its stones holding secrets of a winter long past. But those who know the story will tell you that for a few brief weeks in 1945, that place was more than an abandoned building. It was a sanctuary, a test, a reminder that even in the darkest times, when the world demands cruelty, there are still people brave enough to choose kindness instead. And that choice echoes forward through time, in every life saved, in every child born to a man who should have died, in every moment of grace that defies the logic of hate. Sergeant Daniel Reeves carried it until the day he died, a quiet pride needing no medals. He'd done something that mattered, something true. And in the end, that was enough. The war taught him how to fight, but the convent taught him why.